To use the words of Bentov,
we enter, in effect, a new world.
welcome to the Biosphere. Here to enhance your journey of discovering organizational ecosystems design. Your program will commence shortly. Thank you.
Welcome to the Biosphere. Today we're talking about the subject of organizational ecosystems design. I'm your host, Idris Bernard, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. Mark Sweeney, longtime ecosystem architect and founder of QBeats. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on. Go ahead and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much, Idris. And I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners about something I'm really, really super passionate about. And I'll go into my background in a moment, but I spent the last 4 years working with various sized companies, helping them build and develop their ecosystems. And there's really two things that your listeners will take away from this. And the first is a better understanding of ecosystems, what they are and what they can do. And the second thing is how ecosystems differ from traditional alliance and partner programs. And that's really one of the misnomers of the current period is a lot of organizations are just rebranding their partner programs as ecosystems. And unfortunately, they're doing themselves a disservice because they're not really reaping the full benefit. As a rule of thumb, if it has a certification program, it's not really an ecosystem. And I'll explain in the podcast just what I mean by that. Yes, I'm really thrilled and excited to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, we're happy to have you on. So talk me through a little bit about your origin story. Where are you from? Where you grew up? I know you went to the University of Essex and a little bit of economics there, then a little computer science.
Yeah.
What's the background? What's the history?
Background's really quite an interesting one. Well, at least I think it's quite interesting anyway. So as you probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. And I was born in Manchester, but spent most of my life in Liverpool. And that really confuses people because I sound neither like the Beatles nor Oasis. So it's always confused a lot of folks. But the key thing about my background story is that I've been very, very fortunate to work with firms that have either shaped technology in their time or were early adopters of emerging technology. So, whether you're talking about databases, I remember Oracle 5, Oracle 6, and that gives my age away. I think it's up to 23 now. So, I'm kind of part of that generation that straddles the pre-internet era with the incredible things that we can do today. And that's the thing that really drives me forward is the fact that we can now do things, we can help deliver those better outcomes, not just for ourselves and our communities, but also for our businesses and more importantly for the world. And that to me is a really huge motivation, especially with my children. I mean, my youngest is just over 2, and I want to make sure she has the best possible planet to grow up and live her life on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bit about me. But the thing about my background is what it also has given is a humbleness and an appreciation that what we do today is not what we're always going to be doing. And particularly in the technology space, it changes so quickly. And, there's always something bigger, brighter, and hopefully better coming along. And we're seeing that now with the emergence of things like, generative AI and some of the emerging technologies like quantum. And those are the things that really, really kind of keep me on my toes. And again, the things we can do with both of those, especially combine them together, absolutely enormous. But so if you've listened to a previous ecosystem podcast you did with Greg Sarafin, you'll remember that Greg talked about starting with Novell networking. Well, my background story is I came from the other side of the track, so I was very much on the TCP/IP side of the fence. For those of your listeners who remember these days, Novell and TCP/IP were two very there were two networking technologies that were going toe to toe at one stage, and it seems that TCP/IP is the one that we're probably now all familiar with, and that's kind of what underpins the internet and the world that we know today. However, there is a very interesting sidebar to this. My son, when he got his first Apple Mac, I realized that Mac OS, as it was then called, was actually a derivative of BSD. And so what I was able to do, I worked for Sun Microsystems in the pre-Solaris Solaris 2 days. And so I was able to do stuff through the command prompt. And I remembered enough about it just to have that fleeting moment of that is almost cool. And that was really quite exciting. So yeah, sometimes it's amazing when you realize that some of the knowledge that you pick up, it may be out of date, but it doesn't completely go away.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, so yeah, it was quite an interesting period, shall we say, because it was one of those. Because the thing about your kids is that they forget that you actually had a life before you became a parent,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, it's one of those things that affects us all really. But in terms of my background, I've worked with hardware partners. I've mentioned Sun. I also worked with Hewlett Packard. I've worked with software manufacturers, so people like Oracle. I've helped to develop and grow channel partners. Then I moved into working with managed service providers, so some of the global system integrators, and I've worked with startups as well. I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend some time in that space because that really is where the exciting thing is.
Yeah.
And as we see when we talk about this later on, startups and scale outs have a very important role to play in ecosystems. And if you look at a traditional alliance program, they're typically not catered for in that space. And you end up in the situation where you may have some firms that have an incubate program, and then they have their alliance program, but then there's this gap between when you help start a company up and then when they go through that scale out phase. How do you support them? Because they're too big for your incubator program, but they're not big enough for your alliance program. And so it's a real challenge and issue for organizations that play in this space. And how do you have that continuous involvement with these companies that you can nurture and grow and eventually get the benefit from? So again, I'll talk a bit about that as well, because that's really important, because you don't want to kind of you want to retain that relationship with these organizations, because you can be part of their success, and that actually has benefits in an ecosystem situation.
Right.
Yeah. So if you consider the last 4 years, I've kind of really been focused on ecosystems. And at EY, I was the director of the Trusted Intelligent Connectivity Ecosystem. Bit of a mouthful, I know, but this was all about how do you bring these organizations together to create those ecosystems that can make a big difference. And whilst I was there, I was lucky to spend some time, albeit not enough time, with Greg. So yeah, so there is a connection there between your previous podcast and this one. Although hopefully what you'll see is that what I'll cover is much more of the execution of ecosystems as opposed to the theory of ecosystems. And that's really the difference. It's that kind of, well, okay, I understand all the good things that we could do, but how do we actually go about doing it? And what do we need to do first? What's those first steps? What do we have to have in place? And that's the thing which I find really quite fascinating. Because, and again, part of what I'll be talking about is, why do ecosystems fail? And the reason they fail isn't because of the good intentions of all the participants. It's actually because of some of the mundane housekeeping that's not been put in place. And I can share some stories about some of the things that have kind of spiraled out. But just a kind of a kind of history part, really, more than anything else. You can really define ecosystems and the emergence of ecosystems with the outbreak of COVID. So prior to COVID, it was very much alliances, and ecosystems weren't really talked about the way they are today. But what changed during the lockdowns is we realized just how easy and how convenient it was to be able to collaborate remotely, rather than actually having to haul everybody into a particular location to have those in-person meetings. And what this did is it opened up a whole new range of possibilities. So if you think about how our conversation started, basically it was, I saw the podcast with Greg, and then I reached out to you, and we had a chat, and now here we are having a more detailed conversation. And that's fundamentally what was happening during lockdown. And whether that was because we had a lot of talent working remotely, so they didn't have the same constraints that we had when we were in the office, or whether it was something else, I don't know. But certainly, if I look back, it's that kind of that kind of lockdown that actually really spawned off the realization that actually we could do some really cool stuff, and we didn't have to physically be sitting next to each other.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of examples of this where, we myself and a startup, we worked on a number of projects, and we never even actually had a face-to-face meeting, even though we were talking to people in Europe and in different parts of the world. And what was really cool about this was the fact that you could literally, reach out to somebody who you might have seen something on the internet or on social media, and you could just ping them. You could, either through LinkedIn or through some of the other social media platforms, you could reach out to them and then have a conversation, and then realize what would happen then is they'd go, oh yeah, this is really fascinating, but this guy over here, they've got they know something about this, and the thing could grow organically. And that's again one of the things about ecosystems versus alliances and partnerships, is that you have this ability just to have that kind of organic growth rather than sort of contractual growth. But then what would happen is you kind of get together, and you'd realize that actually there was something which could be done here, or the flip side of it was that you'd realize quickly that that there was nothing that could be done, or what you were doing is you were too premature in your thinking, or the market wasn't ready for this, and therefore you could just park it and move on to do something else. And the beauty of that is that you didn't really waste a lot of people's time, and it fitted that agile approach really, really well, that ability to fail quickly or to be able to pivot. And again, that was really a key driver. And so for me, I would rather spend 10 minutes with somebody who knows and has the experience and benefit from that, rather than spending 2 weeks or so training myself, or train somebody else up to become expert in it, or to get an understanding. And because you'll find that in that 10 minutes, you'll have much more of a direction and a momentum in terms of the possibilities of what could and couldn't be done, than if you try and figure stuff out yourself. And we're seeing this several times now with things. For example, if you look at GPT, we can all kind of try stuff out. However, it's only when you actually get into the nitty-gritty that you begin to realize some of the limitations and challenges, and how we've now got this new term, hallucinating, where the output from your chat GPT or your generative AI has come up with stuff which may or may not be true, and therefore you then have to put another step in place in order to just validate that. And it's so fascinating, the whole thing. But for me, the key thing is, by having that conversation with the people who know, you can then do or deliver something quite meaningful quite quickly, or you can, as I say, you can pivot quick, you can pivot fast, and do something else.
Right. No, right. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'll do, Idris, is I'll go into some of this stuff in more detail, because it is really quite fascinating. And once you appreciate the difference between ecosystems and what they are and what they can do, it really does blow your mind, because the numbers sometimes can be quite scary, and in a good way, by the way, not a bad way. And that's one of the benefits of going with an ecosystem, is the ability to to share the risk, to spread the risk, and to also then share the reward as well. And so as I'll show as we go through this session, once you realize what the power of ecosystems, you also then realize, well, there's some incredible business models that it now opens up to you, which a traditional sort of partnership program just can't do because of the way that they're structured.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into it a little bit. First of all, how would you define the ecosystems that you're talking about? What does it mean to you exactly? How do you
Indeed.
achieve?
That's a very good question, because it's a bit like a lot of these popular terms, which they get a life of their own. They mean everything to everyone. So in my case, ecosystems are very much a collection of companies working together for a common interest. And that's I'll go into that in a bit more detail, just exactly how that's made up, because that's very important. Because then once you start appreciating that, then you can see, just exactly how you can then benefit from the power of the ecosystem. But fundamentally, there's four things that that really sets an ecosystem apart. Firstly, the fact they're disruptive. So
Yeah.
with an ecosystem, you can really, change the way that the people think and the way that we do things, and in some of the cases, actually change the way the world works. The second thing is that they are very much diverse and inclusive. So, instead of just looking at, say, traditional technology partners, an ecosystem would look at some of the non-traditional partners and also non-technical partners. And I'll give you some examples of that later on. The third thing is that they allow you, as I alluded to just now, they could facilitate new business models and new ways of doing business. And the final thing is the ability of the ecosystem then to become a circular, and it's very much focused on the outcome and delivering those better outcomes. And today's outcome becomes tomorrow's data. And once
Yeah.
you realize that, that's when you get your circularity, and that's where you can then get the momentum that drives your ecosystem forward.
Got it.
The other things I'll talk about, I'll talk a bit about why ecosystems fail, and I'll also talk a bit about the future of ecosystems, because both are very important, because you want to be able to make sure your ecosystem is successful. But at the same time, you also need to know that, well, how can I move this forward? What can I do in order to make my ecosystem a success?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because yep. The low.
No, go on.
Yep. Go ahead.
So the first thing about an ecosystem is it's disruptive, right? So if you think about it in a triangle, and there are very various kind of hierarchies of needs, but in this case, if you think about all the companies that do products and services, there's a lot of them. And the thing about products and services is that it doesn't really matter what the question is, what your challenge is. If you talk to a product or service organization, the answer always seems to be, well, buy more of my product and things will be okay. I'm not sure that's always the case, but and you'll find that there are literally thousands of companies that actually offer products and services. Sitting above that, we then have the what I call the challenger space, and what happens here, or the solution space, and what you have now is you have organizations and companies that focus in a particular area or a particular industry, and their value is that they can tell you what's going on in that industry. It's an interesting it's an interesting development in terms of products and services. But what you usually find is that the higher up into an organization you're operating, then the more that organization knows what's going on in the industry. So if you're a traditional product and services company you're used to selling features and functions, the ability to be able to talk about the industry and what's happening in the industry is a step forward. However, most organizations at the senior level, they already know what's going on in the industry because they're shaping it and they're working in it. So it's and this is again something else I'll talk about, is that kind of how you are able, with your ecosystem partners, with that diversity of ecosystem partners, how do you talk with one voice? Because that can be really quite challenging,
Right.
especially when you've got different groups who are used to talking with a different language, not just physically, but also the way that they talk, the nuance of their messaging. Then sitting above that, you would have organizations that help you optimize your business. So this is kind of, let me show you how to run your business better. So this is kind of, where a lot of the system integrators, the managed service providers, and the advisory firms sit. And really what they're able to do is they're able to kind of help you, whether it's through optimization, cost cutting, etc. But they can help you then run your business better. And then finally, you have the peak of this is the disruption, and this is a really, really interesting place to be, because this is where we show you how to run a better business. And so a better business might be more sustainable, it might be simplified, it might be diversified. It's a really it's all about how do you reimagine what your business is. And again, that reimagining space and that disruptive space, there are very few organizations that can actually, you pick up the phone and go, help me come and disrupt my business. You'll get lots of people who can help you run your business better, but in terms of being disruptive and that out of the box thinking, that is very, very difficult. And so if you think about alliances and partner programs, then typically your alliances and partner programs will be playing in the products and services and solutions area. And quite often you might, if you're a system integrator, you might take somebody else's products and services, or two or three of them, integrate them together into an offering. Ecosystems, on the other hand, are very much at the top of this pyramid and about how do we disrupt your business. And that to me is the biggest, that to me is the biggest motivator behind ecosystems and why they're so important. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess there would be like because I think a lot of the older generation or the traditional businesses or big alliances or conglomerates and everything, I guess there's a big shift of how traditional versus how disruptive do they want to get, how much do they want to stay on their toes, how much do they need to stay on their toes to keep up with all the shifts and everything like that, and how much do they want to stay set in their foundations. So it's a good question.
It is, and we've got numerous examples of where it's always easy to stay in a safe space, but you really have to be able to develop and grow, and you need to change. You have the foresight to be able to change and know when to change, and how do you incorporate that change into your business or into your market, so that you retain that ability to be the lead organization. And again, ecosystems allow you to do that. They allow you to think about things in a completely different way. And to me, that's why this stuff is so exciting. And there's just a couple of other things I'd like to introduce into this. So if you think about, well, what's the vertical axis? Well, typically that's value. So in terms of products and services, yeah, you can generate some value out of that. But compared to the value of, reimagining your business, then that's really quite a small amount of value. But the second thing, and I know a lot of people talk about this, they talk about outcomes, about being outcome focused. And the thing is, you can only really be focused on outcomes if you, when the higher up the pyramid you go. And so if you're looking to be disruptive, which you would be as an ecosystem, then you can actually look at those outcomes and you can define what those outcomes could be. If you're selling a product and service, selling another, X number of software licenses or, so many servers, what is the outcome? What is the better outcome that delivers? It's very, very difficult to trace that through. But when you do it at the ecosystem level, it becomes very simple and straightforward. And I'll show you how we can do that and give you some examples of where that's been done in the past. So that's the first key thing about an ecosystem. An ecosystem is disruptive. And that's, again, it's one of those things, because it is disruptive, it's difficult to know, or it's difficult for some organizations to fully grasp it and actually, leverage its full potential. So the second thing I'd like to share with everyone is the idea that ecosystems are diverse and inclusive.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier, ecosystems are not just a rebranding or a modern name for alliance and partner programs. And I'll give you an example. So if you think about this Boston matrix, you can break up your ecosystem into your traditional partners, non-traditional partners, and technology and non-technology partners. So, and if you think about a traditional partnership, it's you might have I mean, the classic one is you might have a partnership with, a hardware or software provider, or a like a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft, for example. And that's very much their traditional partners. They've been partnering for many decades. In fact, thinking about how that whole, whether you call them channels or what label you give them. I mean, I can remember when I was starting, then this whole thing about, having an indirect sales model was very common, and it provided some benefits to the manufacturers. However, what we're seeing now is that there's those non-traditional partners, and I touched on it earlier. I think people like the startups, the scale outs, emerging technology. How do you kind of get those guys engaged into the game? Yeah. Because actually they quite often will have that missing ingredient, that little ingredient that helps you create that secret sauce that will allow you to then go out and facilitate these changes. Then you have your traditional partners that are not technology related. So, for example, these might be your clients or your customers. They might be analysts, for example, and your analysts, you might employ a third party to come and tell you about trends in the marketplace, that sort of stuff, to give you some sort of guidance. And then in the non-traditional, non-technology space, you've got people like regulators, special interest groups, academics, media organizations, etc. So that kind of gives you an idea in terms of, well, why break it into those segments? And do you have to take people from all of those segments in order to make an ecosystem? The answer to that second question is no, but you do need to have at least more than one, because otherwise, if you don't have more than one, then you really are just back in the world of your alliance and partner programs. Right? Yeah. So the second difference really with an ecosystem is the fact that you do have more than one of those segments in your ecosystem in order to make it work. And probably the most common pairing will be the startups and emerging technology. We're seeing that already with things like ChatGPT. How many organizations are building generative AI into their processes and are using it, whether it's to kind of get a start in a particular area or whether it's being used for validating what you've already done. So so that's really how I look at ecosystems and say, well, okay, what makes up an ecosystem? Well, it will have at least 2 of those 4 different partner types in there.
Right. And I think with the startups and the emerging technology, I mean, a lot of those times, those guys and those organizations that are just coming out are much more on the ground with the tech. And so they just have the ability to see the sort of micro trends that would be able to scale up in a macro timeline. So something important to consider when bigger firms are to try to create.
Indeed. And why it's important for startups is this. If you look particularly in those that are going through their funding rounds, yeah. The challenge that they have is that they're still developing. Now, if you take an ecosystem approach, you don't have to, unlike a product or service, you don't have to have it perfect to go day one. Okay, you can quite often start off small and then start to grow. And again, this is one of the attractions about an ecosystem, is that you can actually start with one small particular area, and then you can develop that as the interest grows. And in fact, one of the things that I've created is the concept of a wedge project. And a wedge project is very simple. There's 7 attributes to a wedge project. We could do a whole separate podcast on this, but in a nutshell, in summary, it's a very simple, easy to do project that's ring fenced, that delivers results quickly, that can scale, but most importantly, it's relevant. And so, an example of a wedge project might be air quality in accident and emergency departments. And so, the benefits of air quality are pretty well documented. However, it's such stuff like being able to maximize your productivity and optimize your well-being, that sort of stuff. But the downside of poor air quality is that it can reduce cognitive function. So if you're in an industry, say like an accident and emergency department, where you want to have the people who are making life changing decisions being able to work at an optimal best, you don't want to have them working in an environment where the air quality is poor, because it's documented that will affect and impair their cognitive function. And so something simple like that, you can then look at air quality in a single accident and emergency department, generate data over a matter of weeks that will then allow you to build a case which says, actually, if we were to roll this out to other A&E departments, we would expect to see this level of saving or this level of benefit. And if we were to roll it out to the rest of the hospital or the rest of the facility, then we'll be able to see this kind of benefit. And the attraction of that is that that's one A&E department. And so if you actually do the wedge project and actually you find the air quality is really good and etc., then what you're able to do is at least you've got evidence, and that's what this stuff's about. It's about evidence, about data. You have the data to prove your case, and that's what's so important about ecosystem-based solutions and ecosystems generally. Is it's all about the data. If you can, you collect the data, and from that data you can generate your insights. And again, I'll talk in a bit more detail about that. But, so that's really why ecosystems are so important in this respect. It's that ability to be able to do those wedge projects so that you can actually demonstrate some forward momentum that will actually give you the encouragement and the evidence to continue on, or conversely, it gives you the evidence to say, well, actually, don't continue on, because there are other areas where you can benefit from this. So it helps you understand the opportunity cost. The final point I'd like to mention about the startups here is that if you can build them into a commercial offering, then it does two things for the startup. A, it generates them some cash flow, which is really why they're going out for funding. They need to get some money in. Yeah. And quite often with a lot of the startups, the kind of cash flows that you can generate are on a par, if not greater, than the level of funding, particularly in Series A, Series B fundings, and they're likely to generate. And the second aspect of that is that by having a cash flow coming into your startup, then you're able to demonstrate a higher value and therefore attract more, a greater value and more investment into your business. Because if you can demonstrate a track record of cash flow, as opposed to just I've got a great idea which could generate this, then it just makes your startup much more appealing to external investors.
Definitely. No, definitely, I agree.
And any thoughts?
I'm just taking it all in. What you're saying about, I remember what you were saying about the climate and the data and everything like that, but no, it's making sense though.
Indeed. And so a final point really to make here is the difference between alliance programs, partner programs, and ecosystems. If you look at a traditional alliance partner, and this is again pretty well documented, you'll see a percentage growth. It may be 10, 13, 40, it'll be a percentage growth. But quite often that growth is quite transactional, and it's usually a one-off. So, for example, as a result of a partnership, you might win a deal, and that deal might it'll be a one-off deal, and it'll inject some good revenue and profit into your business. With an ecosystem, you'll actually get a multiple growth. And what I mean by multiple, so if you're looking to grow by a multiple, 2, 3, 4 times, then you really need to be more focused on an ecosystem model rather than an alliance and partnership model. And as I'll explain in the next slide, you can not only do that from how you get that multiple growth is through your relationship within the ecosystem partners and the client, but also you're then creating a business model that will help you generate recurring annuity revenue rather than those transactional one-offs. And again, that's probably one of the biggest differentiators between an ecosystem model versus a traditional alliance or partnership model. This is just an example of one which quantum is a big thing for now. Another one of my passions is quantum computing, and the Quantum Insider has just working with the likes of BMW and Airbus. They've just launched a quantum computing challenge, and so if you look in terms of that as a against my ecosystem template, you can see how how that kind of fits the framework of an ecosystem. So the non-technology partners in this case would be the clients, which are BMW and Airbus. The traditional technology partners are people like AWS and some of the established quantum companies. Non-traditional partners are the quantum startups. So there are a number of those: Cubase, Quantinuum, etc. In fact, Quantinuum really should be in the established because they've just won a huge round of funding. So and the investors are beginning to wake up to the value that quantum can bring. And then in terms of non-traditional, non-technology partner, you have the Quantum Insider magazine, which is kind of promoting this. So that's just one example of what an ecosystem could look like. And again, once you look at it in this kind of this framework, then this is where you can start opening up some of the possibilities that previously you would not be able to see if you were just looking at it from a traditional alliance or partnership model.
Right. Because I know you were talking about earlier about how it can unlock sort of new business models and new ways of being disruptive in that regard. So, how would that work? How does that?
That's a really good question, because how it works is this: if you look at where you are today, you've probably got a traditional linear business model. This is often referred to as P times Q. It's kind of how many price. Okay, and in an ecosystem, you can still do that. You're not constrained from doing that. But some of the other services that you can then, or the other ways you can start structuring the business and the commercial model for ecosystem offerings, is you might offer it as a managed service. So you're going to generate an outcome of X, and therefore what you can do is you say, well, look, let us run that for you as a service to deliver that outcome, and we will charge you Y. And again, when I talk about the outcome-based model, then I can give you an example of how that would operate. But not only do you do that, you can also start looking at other things, for example, like a subscription-based model. So again, I can put this solution together with the ecosystem, and instead of working out all the individual components and taking a cost-based model, what I can do is I can say, well, actually, for this service, we will charge you so much per month or so much per year. And again, that just helps in terms, particularly once you get more organizations in the ecosystem, how you divide the revenues become much more complex. And so that's, again, one of the things that you have to then start thinking about as well. A phrase which may be appropriate here is the financial integrator or the commercial integrator. Because you don't want to be, if you've got half a dozen companies in your ecosystem, you don't want to present the client with half a dozen invoices. Right. The client just wants one invoice, and then part of the ecosystem, part of the ecosystem offering has to do the administrative part in terms of, well, how do we divide that up? Who gets what?
Exactly.
Also, you might look at a pay-per-use model. So having actually put your offering together in the ecosystem, you might then choose to say, well, actually, every time you use this, we will then charge you for doing that. So again, so you pay as you go. You might want to look at your offering as a microservice, and the thing about a microservice is that you don't necessarily know where your service is going to be used. It just it just is embedded into a wider offering, and then you might get micropayments that come back to you every time that service is used, but you have no idea who's using it, what they're using it for. All you know is the service has been triggered. And then on top of that, you may have IP. So the IP that you generate from the ecosystem, you may then be able to resell that. And then finally, a joint venture. So you may find that your what the ecosystem is able to do is so compelling that actually you decide we're going to create a separate entity, a legal entity, in order to be able to deliver this service. Because you may find you're taking parts out of you might be taking parts of product and services. You might be taking some integration. You might be taking some customer support. There may be several items that you are taking from existing businesses that actually think that would work better if, instead of being constrained by the parent company, that they were able to work on their own.
I mean, and I would also assume that within the ecosystem, like, because there's potentially different players and all these things, that the offering for different types of services can also be very flexible, upsell, downsell into different subscription or IP. There's just a lot of leverage points specifically that sit within.
Correct, and that's part of the commercial conversation within the ecosystem, is understanding, well, what is the appropriate commercial model that we need to go with, and
Yeah.
What may be appropriate to begin with today may not necessarily be appropriate in 2 or 3 years' time. And so having the flexibility to be able to flip is really important. The other thing about the ecosystem is the ability to influence the market. So as an ecosystem provider, if you come up with an example, and let's say we talk about air quality again. So one of the things you may do as a result of to monetize the air quality is you may end up selling a subscription, and that may go to, because it benefits the individuals who work in that organization or who inhabit that organization. You may charge a subscription to the controlling entity. So whether it be the facilities management company or whether it be the owner of the building, for example. And what you're then able to do is you can then derive a subscription-based revenue from that. However, as over time and other competitors come into the market, what you're then able to do is, because you've already put the investment in, and the thing with the ecosystem is it's a much lower risk to you, and that risk is shared among the ecosystem partners. Because you've done that, then you can start to very quickly, as you know, with Netflix. I mean, how much of your Netflix subscription is profit, and how much of it is covering the cost of setting up Netflix?
Yeah.
Well, Netflix's setup costs were covered a long time ago.
Yeah.
So you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay for that. Yes, you pay for the improvement, you pay for the development, but with a commercial model which is like subscription based or pay per use, what you have the flexibility to do is you can then change the level of subscription, or how much you pay every time you use it, based on the value or the perceived outcome that you can generate. And again, over time, you might be able to say in year one a large, multi-million pounds, but then by the time you're into year 2, year 3, that saving has become normalized into the business, and so it's no longer justifiable to keep spending that same level of amount of money. And so, as the ecosystem provider running the commercials, what you're able to do then is reduce that charge, because at that point your costs have been covered. Certainly your setup costs have been covered, and then you just have to worry about covering the variable costs, which are considerably less. And so that gives you the flexibility then to flip your charging model. And eventually, and I say with air quality, you may end up in a situation where in 5 years' time you actually give that away free, because it's in it's a community interest, or it's a public interest thing, rather and it's seen as a benevolent thing. But the advantage that you, as the organization that brought it to market, as in your ecosystem, is that you've covered your costs, and you've been able to help drive the adoption, and therefore change the commercial offering so that it becomes much more advantageous to you and your ecosystem than to maybe a competitor looking to move in. So that's the thing. The ecosystems is it gives you that flexibility, it gives you an extra lever that you can pull in order to help the ecosystem survive.
Yeah. And you spoke a little bit earlier about how those outcomes will create the data for the future. And just that scenario with the air quality service, one of the big things, I mean, we talk about IP and everything like that, but the data collected from all the revenue models and everything like that, that's just another stream as well, and that can provide another um, pathway into the ecosystem. So I know you wanted to talk a
Indeed.
bit.
Indeed. So let me talk about outcomes and why, you know, ecosystems are much better at being able to determine outcomes. So the model really is very simple, and that is you have the four things. You have data, and everything is driven by data, right? That's the key thing with an ecosystem, is it's all about the data. So and data can either be, you know, the classic gathered data. So if you think about how, excuse me, organizations might take data from their ERP and CRM systems, they may combine it into data lakes or data warehouses that are then used to look at trends and that sort of stuff. So you have your data, but the data drives the insight. So your insight layer is your typical, you know, business intelligence, your machine learning, your you know, your generative AI, and from that insight you can then initiate action, and those actions then help deliver those better outcomes. So in terms of a model, very, very simple. And so to give you an example of that, it may be, if you think about a commercial kitchen, you may get the data back from your sensors in the kitchen that allows you to be able to go, actually, you know, you've got these appliances running and consuming this energy at these times when there's no, you know, it's quiet times where there's no or very small amounts of custom, and therefore the action you can initiate is to reduce or maybe even switch off some of those devices, or certainly power them down so they consume less electricity. And the outcome is you save you save money on your energy bills. Okay. There may also be some side impacts of that. You know, for example, some of that equipment might be particularly noisy, so you might also be, you know, making it a more bearable workplace. There could be other outcomes, and that again is the beauty of the ecosystem, is that you can look at these outcomes and you can then work out what those outcomes are, and then attribute a monetary cost to them. And so another example of this might be a conditional maintenance program, moving to a conditional maintenance program where previously you had a planned maintenance program. And the saving that you make is actually by looking at a particular data point that will give you an indicator. It might be something like wear, for example. It might be something like iron in oil, that sort of stuff. There may be a number of different levers that you can measure and monitor that will allow you to say, you know, to determine the condition of the device, you know, whether it be, you know, a car, you know, lorry, aeroplane, for example. And from that data, you can then do your insight. So in terms of, you know, in terms of your conditional maintenance, you can then see where that value is trending against where is its maximum, and therefore you can then work out, you know, that trajectory. Where is it going to hit that threshold that says you need to bring this thing in for maintenance? And that action then is you bring it in when you need to bring it in, as opposed to you know, doing it every 6 weeks or every 3 months, or whatever your schedule is. The outcome is then you reduce the amount of maintenance that you actually need to do on the vessel, on the item, plus you then are able to utilize that more often. So, you know, your simple outcome may be, you know, the two key factors there may be the extra, the value of the extra usage that you're getting because it's not offline, and the cost of the servicing or the maintenance that you would have had to pay that you no longer need to pay. And so it's quite simply those two items alone can give you a justification as to why a conditional maintenance program would be better. And what you can then do is you can work out, well, okay, if I'm saving this amount of money over these amount of items, then you can work out a cost per item per month in terms of being able to deliver that service that allows you to move to that conditional maintenance model. Because there'll be many players that are required to make that up, to make that happen, as opposed to if you look at everybody individually, it will never happen, because, you know, they're too busy optimizing and working in their own silos. rather than
Yeah.
being able to kind of see that end-to-end picture. And again, that's the thing that the ecosystem allows you to do, is it allows you to sit down and look at that end-to-end picture and then work out what what you could do. So if you look at, and the thing you talked about was how do today's outcome becomes tomorrow's data. And so that's where you get your circularity, because once you look at today's outcome, then you've got some more knowledge. You put that back into your data set, and then you can then use that new knowledge to make sure that you're still within that zone of where you need to be. And again, the beauty of that is, as you're looking at the data, as the new data comes in, you can then see, well, where do I need to optimize? Where do I need to tweak? And that's a much different conversation to have than if you think about the conversation you normally have in an alliance program or within a business today.
No, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think
Does that make sense?
it does. No, it does. It does. And I think there's something to be said also, like just when you're talking about the maintenance program and all these things and cost savings on that, there's something to be said about a level of predictability factor within the ecosystem that is largely at play with that you can do with a lot of different partners and everything like that to help. I know it's the zero distance award from where just like anticipating the customer's need before even they potentially are ready themselves to handle that need and everything like that. But I can see how the data, the information, there's a level of predictability there that just makes it smoother for them on their side.
Indeed. And you touched upon something really important there, Idris, and that is the customer. And again, with ecosystems, an ecosystem may include the customer. And that's
Right.
really, and that again is something which is kind of, well, you'd never get the customer engaged in a partner or alliance program, but within an ecosystem you would. And it's for that exact reason. It's because, if you think about the way that our businesses are set up today, it's all about, well, we produce these products and services, and how do we then kind of sell? How do we fit the customer's need to what we're offering? Whereas with an ecosystem approach, what you're doing is you're flipping that around and you're saying, well, look, what are the kind of challenges and issues that you have, and how can we help you fix them? And the beauty about an ecosystem approach is you're not trying to fix the whole issues. And if you think about the health service, for example, or you think about any large organization, they all have problems. They all have challenges that need to be fixed. The thing is, there typically isn't a silver bullet or a magic wand that you can wave that will fix those. However, by taking an ecosystem approach, you can then look at, and we talked about air quality and A&E. Why is air quality and A&E a good place to start? Well, it's because you're not going to fix the thing about waiting times and servicing people through, delivering people through the A&E. That's a huge problem. It's a multi-agency problem. It's more than the likes of you or I could be able to do. However, if you can make those small changes, what you're doing is you're providing that kind of room to breathe. You're providing a gap that says, well, actually, I've made this 1% bigger. And this is again comes back to the idea of the wedge project. And the wedge project itself comes from how you launch ships. And so typically underneath, people see above the boat, you've got the celebrity going, God bless her, all who's sailing her. Bottle of champagne hits hits the boat, and the boat gracefully slides down the slipway into the water. What you don't see is underneath the boat is the guy with the sledgehammer knocking out this thing called a ship's wedge. And that ship's wedge is the thing. Once that goes, that just moves it over the tipping point that allows the momentum of the boat or the mass of the boat to create the momentum that allows it to slip down the slipway. And again, this is the whole idea about wedge projects, is that you're not going to fix these big problems, these big structural problems, because they're too big and such a solution doesn't exist. However, if you can make sufficient change, if you can just make small changes and you can do them a lot of them, then you can make a big difference. And a really good example of that is if you think about our attitude towards single-use plastics. And
Mm.
that's changed quite dramatically over the past 3-4 years. And the reason, and one of the catalysts for the change wasn't a big government initiative, or it wasn't some mass education program. It was actually down to something really simple as a TV program that kind of went viral. And what that encouraged us to do is everybody made a small change. And because there's so many of us making that small change, it made a big difference. And that's really the philosophy behind ecosystems, is you don't have to do that kind of grandiose, that big scheme. You don't have to do that big thing that typically costs a lot of time and a lot of money. By
Yeah.
actually doing something small and meaningful and being able to repeat that and being able to scale that, then actually that's where you make a meaningful impact and a meaningful difference.
So how exactly does this differ from an alliance? Yeah, exactly. How does this differ from like a sort of traditional alliance partnership model versus ecosystem model? I know this is a sort of a big question.
Yeah, huge question. And what I tried to do is distill some of the differences between ecosystems and traditional alliances and partners. And so if you look at what's an ecosystem built on, it's built on trust and a mutual benefit and identifying that win-win. So what is the thing that you can do that is going to deliver that win-win, that will deliver that outcome that you can all benefit from? And the trick with an ecosystem is it's not, if one partner says, I don't want to do this, or I'm going to try and do this on my own, then they just don't have all the other components in order to make it happen, whereas the ecosystem does. And so there's that mutuality that you get from the ecosystem that you don't get from an alliance program. Typically, an alliance program, it's very contractual, and there's a legal contract between both parties. It's typically peer-to-peer relationship, and you kind of go, yeah, we're going to make these commitments. There may be some targets in there as well. In terms of an ecosystem, it's a one-to-many relationship as opposed to a one-to-one peer-to-peer relationship that you get in alliances. So your ecosystem might have 3, 4, 5, it may have a dozen different partners involved in that. And those partners may cover from large organizations through to small startups. And so in terms of investment for an ecosystem, what you're investing is your time, your capabilities, and your expertise, right? So that's what you as an ecosystem player are putting into the ecosystem. Whereas if you have an alliance, then you're typically putting in some sort of money. There may be, you may end up, there may be some marketing funds and that sort of stuff. You're putting people into it, so you might be committing like an account manager, some pre-sales resource. There'll be some training, and this is where we're talking about, if there's a certification program, it's not an ecosystem, because certification basically means you're an extension of the company who you've got your alliance and partnership with. Whereas with an ecosystem, it's an extension. You still operate and as an independent entity, and so you're able then to put into that ecosystem what is appropriate to make the ecosystem work. Okay. In terms of engagement, how do you get engaged? Well, in an ecosystem, it's as and when required. So it may be that you're only required that initial setup, and you might have a particular skill or expertise about how you can maybe combine things together or integrate things together. But that input, that effort, is still recognized going forward. Whereas if you look at in an alliance model, you've usually got full-time teams. You'll have your account teams that typically work together in terms of promoting that joint message between the respective partner organizations. In terms of the sales model, it's ecosystems very much relationship based, and you may find you're looking on a multi-year type, or certainly an annual type basis. Whereas if you look at an alliance or partner program, it's very much quarterly driven. You have those targets you need to hit, and it's very much in that traditional sales model.
Right.
And again, that's why if you think about just calling your additional alliance program an ecosystem, that's why it's not going to work, because fundamentally they are different beasts, and you can't flex one to be the other, because it just doesn't work. In terms, in terms of commercial model, we talked about this. With ecosystems, you can look at non-linear models, whereas traditionally with an alliance partnership, you're very much a linear model. It might be margin based, or there may be some margin splits between the respective partners. The flip side of that, of course, is, and this is, if you've worked in the channel, this is a scenario that's sadly all too frequent. You might be working on an opportunity and you're competing against another channel partner, and the actual the host company, the company that that you're both partnering with, they may actually allocate that particular account or that opportunity to one or other of the partners. And so you end up with this duplication of resources competing after the same piece of business. And how that's won is done on an arbitrary basis with the initial partner, which lends itself to friction between your channel. And that's really to be avoided if you can, at all costs. Whereas if you're in the ecosystem, for the outcome you're looking to provide, then the partners in the ecosystem are the partners in the ecosystem. It's not like you've got a range of different partners that could deliver one particular component. In terms of the growth, as mentioned earlier, you with an ecosystem, you're looking at multiples, and I based on some of the ecosystems I've looked at, you could be looking at tens of millions to billions, whereas with an alliance-based program, you might be looking at a much smaller size, which might be hundreds of thousands to tens of millions. So there's that real difference in scale in terms of the reward that you can potentially get out of these ecosystem-based opportunities. And the final thing really is the focus. And in an ecosystem, it's all about the outcome. What is the outcome we're looking to deliver? Whereas with your alliances, it might be about the propositions that you can do together. And so that's, again, is a real clear differentiation between an ecosystem-based approach and an alliance-based approach. What do you think so far?
I think it makes sense. I mean, they're two completely different things.
Yeah, I mean, once you start looking at it in detail, once you start delving into it, you begin to realize just how how different these two approaches are. And you can kind of understand why. What one of my pet hates is where you see this kind of, we'll just rebrand our alliance or our partner program as an ecosystem program, because they are two different animals and they need to be managed and handled in different ways. And there's already a body of work now in terms of, well, how do you manage ecosystems versus the traditional alliance programs? And there's a recognition that you have to manage them in different ways, because the traditional alliance program management structures just don't work. And again, the reason for that is summarized in this table, whether it's the amount of resources you need to put in to your alliance. So again, that's money that then needs to be recovered in some shape or form. And again, if you built a big partner team and you're not getting the revenues or the opportunities coming through, then that's a wasted investment. Whereas if you look at it from an ecosystem point of view, you're only engaged in the ecosystem if there is something you can contribute, and therefore there will be a reward at the end of it. However, the challenge is you can't predict exactly when that reward will land and land in the books. So taking a traditional quarterly target or annual target approach is very difficult, and that's really why you need to have both. It's not an either or. You need to have both, and what you'll see over time is a transition, I believe, away from alliances into ecosystems.
So when you're talking about the traditional management of ecosystems and alliances, the partnering capabilities and everything like that, and you're talking about the reward that's on the other side for coming into the ecosystem and everything, but what are some reasons why, what are some traps and potential downfalls that people might not see when they want to go and they're choosing to potentially go or transition from an alliance to an ecosystem, or looking to add that into their mode of working? Like why exactly were some of the reasons why they would fail or have some shortcomings in that?
Indeed. The number one reason I've seen why ecosystems fail is cultural. And whilst that's quite a good thing to say, let me share some of the challenges that need to be overcome in this situation. If you think about the companies that make up the ecosystem, traditionally the sales teams are used to selling the products and services of that partner. That's what they do, whether it's through a direct or indirect sales model. That's what they're used to doing. When you then ask those people to work with other organizations to sell an outcome, that is a really difficult obstacle to overcome. And there are a number of reasons for this. For example, one which I've come across is where is who leads with the customer, who owns the customer. And quite often, if you think about that, the triangle we discussed at the beginning, quite often the different parts of those different parts of that triangle are talking to different parts of the business. So it's not uncommon to find, for example, that the product and service people are talking maybe to the IT department, whereas the people at the optimization layer are talking to CFOs, CIOs. They're talking at the C-suite level. And the thing about that is that it's fundamentally two different conversations that go on. Now, what often will happen is where you bring those different organizations into an ecosystem, then there is a particular culture. So, for example, if you're looking at products and services, it's very much a target quarterly driven type mentality. Whereas if you look at the C-suite level, it's much more of a relationship. And so how can you then meld those two into a common, a common message and a common nuance that will, which will allow you to land at the appropriate level? And so it's not uncommon for example, the product and services elements of the ecosystem. They want to kind of tell you all about the features and functions of their solution and what they offer. And quite often at the C-suite, that's really not a conversation they're interested in. And so it's kind of, how can you then mute that or change the nuance of that so that it becomes a message that the C-suite want to listen to and are receptive to? And the challenge then that brings is that the perception then with that sales team, the product and service sales team, is, well, I'm being maneuvered out of this opportunity. And so that's why the attitude really has to change. And you need to, and this comes down to trust. How do you generate the trust between the ecosystem members in order to be able to have everybody win in the ecosystem? And so that cultural thing is a real obstacle that has to be overcome. And if you talk to anybody from an alliance program, this is an area of commonality between the two. If you talk to anybody from a channel or alliance program, getting them to get engaged in opportunities within their organization is notoriously difficult to do, because quite often the sales team, the direct sales team, will look at the jam team and go, what value are you adding to me? Or they might just see them as a marketing function as opposed to a value add function. And that again it's an attitude that needs to change. And another example of why the attitudes need to change is I've seen situations where an account manager or a client manager has had difficulty getting the resource internally within their organization, or they found a resource that they kind of the square peg fitting into a round hole scenario, and they've introduced that group or individual to their client, only to find that the client knows more about the challenge and issue than the person they put in front, and that's created a very bad impression. So they're naturally very, very wary. Those direct guys are very wary about not introducing things into their sales opportunity that they don't have control over. And again, if you bring an ecosystem in, the direct salesperson will kind of go, why do I need to do this? And actually that example that I've just given about not having the resource internally is exactly why you need to get that ecosystem in there, because what you will do is in front of the client, you will have the people that know and can come across very knowledgeably and can actually help address or frame the client's challenge or issue that will then position what you're trying to sell as a part of the ecosystem as in a much more positive way. And so, and quite often, the kind of whole sales motion is much more different. It's a much more collaborative type sell, much more collaborative type engagement. And actually, typically, where I found this has worked really well is where you actually engage the client in the conversation. And again, something else which I'm really quite big and passionate on is show, don't tell. So if you can help show the client how things could be, as opposed to tell them how it could be, you'll find the conversation is way more constructive, considerably more engaged. And what you're able to do then is make the opportunity much more of a customer engaged experience. It's about the experience. You know, how do you get that positive experience from your client? And the thing about experience is that anything that you experience as an individual will typically stay with you for a lot longer than if you just present stuff on slides and you tell people about something.
Right.
And it's a small thing, but again, that kind of show don't tell is very, very much geared towards an ecosystem type way of doing business, rather than a traditional, here is our product deck that the marketing department's put together, which may have a whole bunch of sales messages which might be meaningful to the marketing department. But in terms of the client, they look at it and they go, well, why is this of interest to me? What's the benefit to me? What's the outcome this is going to deliver for me? Whereas if you do it if you co-create with the client, then actually it becomes an our thing. It's the client and the ecosystem. And then what you're able to do is you've then got something which is much stronger that you can then take forward. And if you think about the Wedge project, the thing with the Wedge project is you're looking at an outcome that you can actually then, that will be relevant to that business. And therefore, the C-suite or those that are directly impacted by it have a vested interest in seeing work. And that really is, it's about how can you get people, how can you get your clients and your customers to buy into something? And the simplest way to do it is for them to tell you what they want, what they need, as opposed for you to try and come with a menu of things which confuses everybody. So culture is definitely the number one issue, and that does require a different mindset to what most organizations, particularly those with direct sales forces, are used to. The second reason why ecosystems fail is down to operational issues, and I touched upon this earlier. So it may be how you set up the ecosystem, and so there's a certain process you need to go through so that each party is protected and that their intellectual property and contribution is protected. And so, for example, even just something like simple NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. If you're a large organization that's used to dealing with these things, then you've probably got a large legal department that's also used to going through NDAs and stuff. Whereas what you actually need is something, if you're a startup on the other hand, you don't have that functionality, you don't have that capability. And so what you need is something which is really quite lightweight, that can be addressed quickly so that you can engage the smaller members of the ecosystem as well as the larger members. And so having that ability to have those lightweight processes is really key. And the irony is, of course, is that once you've got those lightweight processes set up, then your existing heavyweight processes will typically look to those and go, well, can't we be more like those rather than like these big clunky things that we have today? So you actually do get a benefit from that. The other operational issue, which is which has to be addressed, is the day-to-day business as usual management of the client. So and the ecosystem shouldn't be seen as kind of the only vehicle by which you engage your client. You'll still have, if you're a server manufacturer, you'll still be selling your servers into that business. If you're a services manufacturer, you'll still be selling your services into that business. And so you don't want to compromise or jeopardize your existing business as usual business because you've got an ecosystem. That's why your ecosystem has to be focused on outcome rather than just selling more of the same. And then the other thing is who gets rewarded and how do they get rewarded? Because that again is a big challenge, because you might your contribution to the ecosystem might have happened maybe 6, 12, 18 months earlier. And you might actually, waiting that length of time before you see any recognition for it might actually, that's typically is beyond the sales systems of most organizations. And so how do you manage the commercial and who gets what share and what revenue? So that also needs to be agreed. And quite often that's not really at the forefront of people's minds when they're setting up ecosystems. They focus on the let's work together and the positive things that we could do together, and excuse me, and the whole kind of commercial reward piece that just comes in as an afterthought. Likewise, things like the legal side of things, who's responsible for what, that you always is overlooked as well. And so these are the operational things that have to be addressed as well when setting up ecosystems. And again, that's why a lot of ecosystems fail, is because and I've known situations where two organizations have decided they want to work together, and they've skipped the memorandum of understanding, so which actually defines who actually is going to do what. And of course you can't really go to market if you haven't got that nailed down. So so there's a whole number of things which go on behind the curtain, behind the scenes, that have to be put in place before you can actually go public and launch your ecosystem. And then the final thing is governance. And again, is how do you govern your ecosystem? How do you manage the ecosystem effectively? And that's not just in terms of the kind of day-to-day management, but it's also the end-to-end management as well. And so you have to know who is responsible and who's accountable for which parts of the offering at which point in time in the offering. So it's all well and good creating the enthusiasm for the outcome, if you then haven't agreed who's accountable, who's responsible, and what are those handover points. And again, you can see how the lack of governance can quite easily unpick a really good ecosystem. So those are just three things that which if an ecosystem is going to fail, where will it come undone? So culture, operational issues, and governance.
It seems like a large aspect of this has a lot to do with sort of network relationship management, like just managing the relationship in between, the governments, the cultural differences, the players, the partners, the clients, and just having a good, trusting, open, worthy relationship to get the information and communications flowing smoothly, and
That's right.
Yeah.
And the key to building trust is involvement. So if you keep people involved, then they understand what's going on. They can see what's happening. They can understand, because again, with ecosystems, there may be a gap between the initial, let's do this. This is the outcome we're looking to do, and then being in a position to be able to start, realizing some of the benefits of that ecosystem. And the thing is, how do you fill that gap between that initial enthusiasm and when things start coming through? Because again, some of these, some of the challenges and issues, or the outcomes you're looking to address and achieve, they are, they could be things like, for example, how do you solve a problem like electric vehicle charging? So one of the challenges at the moment is, there's a number of players that can offer this. There are a myriad of different service providers, yet we don't seem to have enough of these charging points. So, and in order to get those charging points, it takes time. They don't just spring up overnight. And so, if you kind of think about that from an ecosystem perspective, you might have your initial workshops and thought process and think, yep, this is what we're going to do. Then there's like it could be a 9-12 month period where nothing really seems to happen, because you're getting your planning permission and this sort of stuff, and those external processes can take an awful lot of time. And so how do you keep the whole thing, the momentum going, so that you don't end up in a situation where you go, oh yeah, last summer we did this and it was fantastic, and now here we are 12 months later and nothing's happened. And so the tendency then is to go, well, that was a waste of time then, wasn't it? But
Yeah,
again, if you can keep that involvement, even if it's just a simple touch point, to say, look, here we are, this is what's happening, this is what's happening next, then that allows you to at least keep keep people informed, so they know that actually stuff is really going on, and that they can help set their expectations appropriately.
absolutely, absolutely. So how do you see this continuing to evolve? How do you see this,
Yeah.
continue to get into the future? Where are we going with it?
Well, that really is the exciting part of this, is that ecosystems are just too important to ignore. They will happen, and at the moment they tend to be happening in an ad hoc kind of fashion,
Yeah,
and almost on like an as and when basis. The benefits in terms of the opportunity to disrupt the market and to be able to enter new markets, or even shape new markets that currently either are immature or don't exist. That's really one of many benefits, along with the lower risk. So as I mentioned earlier about being able to contribute what you know in your time, as opposed to committing resources and capital. So we will see ecosystems will grow, and they will become a preferred model for organizations to transact and do business, especially as we become much more we're looking at some of the bigger problems, like, for example, how do we do climate change and that sort of stuff. Again, that's not going to be one organization or one government that actually can address that. It's something that we all have to do. And so we have to be it has to be done through an ecosystem of because we'll have a mutual interest in the outcome. So they're going to be here, they're going to grow. So in order to make that happen, and to make that happen in a consistent and a productive way, then you'll see the rise of these ecosystem specialists. So just as we have ESG specialists and technology specialists,
yeah,
audit specialists, you'll get ecosystem specialists. So if you look at the business I've just launched, QBeads, that's about how do you set this stuff up. So a lot of the knowledge and experience that I've picked up over the last 4 years, I've been able to systemize and put into a process that allows other organizations to be able to leverage that experience and expertise, so they don't have to go through making a lot of the common mistakes that I've seen or I've done myself. But you'll also see these new roles as well. So you'll see people like an ecosystem architect who's capable of building ecosystems. You'll see people like ecosystem governors. So instead of having it like an account manager that looks after a particular partner, you might have an ecosystem governor that looks after the ecosystem, and they're responsible then for ensuring that it works in the way that it's supposed to. And also your ecosystem administrators. So these are the people that make sure that all the processes are done in the right sequence at the right time, and things like, for example, the revenues are distributed in an appropriate and a good fashion, that sort of stuff. And also, that make sure the kind of the behind the scenes of the ecosystem is functioning. So you'll see these, the kind of the rise of the ecosystem specialists. But my key advice, really, the thing that I've learned from all this, is that start small. You start small and accelerate. Okay, the idea is you have a big idea, in that idea where you'd like to go to, whether it's better air quality for everybody, or whether it's most efficient use of resourcing, so you take out waste, or it's saving the planet, or net zero. You have that kind of that ambition, but start small, make a step, do something. And that, because the thing about doing, if you do nothing, things will only get worse. If you do something, worst case scenario is you realize that was the wrong thing to do, and you can then you can backpedal from that, or you can pivot and do something something different. Best case, of course, is you actually you make it, you start the momentum that actually will then help make that big change that we can all benefit from. And make sure that when you do start small, that you can see how you could scale what you're doing. And so that ability to scale is so important, because if as you think what your ecosystem, the outcome your ecosystem will deliver is of huge benefit, then all of a sudden you're going to go from just a very simple wedge situation into, and going back to the air quality in A&E, you could literally go, or it might be air quality in school or a public building. You will go from doing your wedge project, which might just be one room, one area, into the whole hospital or into the whole trust or into the whole country. So, and you have to be able to have the processes that will allow you to scale out like that. And that is really, really important, because if you're there's nothing worse than having an ecosystem comes up with a fantastic idea, demonstrates the value of that idea, and then you can't deliver it because you've got a bottleneck somewhere in your ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to build in scalability. I mean, there's a couple of other things which, and again, this might be something as we go into the actual nuts and bolts. But what I've also found is that in any ecosystem, you need to make sure that ecosystem is secure, and you need to make sure that ecosystem is sustainable. And if you build those in from the ground up, then it means that your outcome is a much better outcome than if you come up with an idea or an outcome that you then have to bolt those onto afterwards. So again, there's a number of things like that which actually can make a huge difference if you do it in the right order.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot to think about here. There's a lot for people to think about, a lot of people to for people to digest and evaluate just how impactful this is going to be for them now and in the future, and just to start thinking about it.
The key thing is make a start, and start small. You don't have to go and tackle your biggest problem. It might just be something which is sitting on the periphery. And some of the most successful ecosystems and transformations I've been involved with have had some very small solution or some small outcome or challenge that was addressed. And because of the way that was addressed, that sparked the interest in terms of, wow, how did you do that? And that's really, it doesn't matter what you do, so long as you do something.
Right. Yeah. Little steps, let it compound, let it keep building up.
Indeed.
It's exciting stuff. It's exciting stuff, and I'm excited to see where it keeps going and how it keeps evolving. People getting more involved in the conversation, like yourself, getting other people. So it's very very engaging, very informative. So where can we find you? Where can we find you in the future? And just a couple last questions. Where where can we find you? And then what's something that you're just most proud of in your life right now, up until now, up at this moment?
Right. So where you can find us is if you just reach out to me at mark.qbeads.com, and that's where you'll find me. And yeah, the important thing is to have the conversation. Just start the conversation. Let's do something, and something that will make a difference that we can then snowball and accelerate. That's that. But in terms, there's so many things that I've been fortunate enough to be involved with that have made differences, and it's everybody likes to do the kind of hero change the world type stuff, but quite often it's the small things that give you that satisfaction. I mean, excluding my children, there are a lot. I mean, and some of them are quite interesting stories. Like a while ago, I was involved with an organization that was looking to move their database from one platform to another, and the challenge they had was they could only find an extended or holiday weekend to be able to do that. And the challenge that is, of course, is it's very, very difficult to do that. And again, what I was able to do was come up with an idea that was able to mean that they could move their database in a matter of hours. And it was quite a simple idea. And that, to me, and thinking about this to answer the question, Idris, is it's having those ideas that make a difference to people's lives. That's the thing that I'm most proud of. And whether it's something like wedge projects is obviously one which is current, but there's so many that I've been fortunate to be involved with in the past. So, for example, about 15 years ago, I came up with an idea about business transformation, which I called SAME, which stood for Simplify, Automate, Manage, Externalize. And that's as true today. If you're looking to transform your business, then that's what you should do. Simplify your processes, automate the processes, manage your processes, so you've got that governance and you don't expose yourself to adverse risk, and then externalize them so that the person who benefits from the outcome or benefits from the process is the person that drives the process. And say if you're looking to transform a business, that's the process you would follow. So there's a whole heap of these, and I've just been very fortunate that I've always seemed to have been, at that kind of cusp where, things, the possibilities are becoming apparent. And so for me today, what really excites me is not just the ecosystems, but some of the technologies that are coming out, which will make our lives so much better. Whether you're looking at things like, for example, tagans to make sure that we consume the authentic product that we think we're consuming and not some counterfeit or tampered product. Whether it's things like air quality. I mean, air quality is a big one for me because the quality of air affects everybody. We all breathe, irrespective of what race, what creed, what gender, how wealthy we are. We all breathe, and the air that we breathe, it's the same for you as it is for me. Well, usually, and everybody is entitled to have good quality air to breathe, and and that to me is another area, and there's some really cool and interesting stuff happening in that space that will make such a huge difference. Whether it's if you're a hay fever sufferer or asthma sufferer, so that you can then monitor when the environment you're in is becoming hostile or threatening to your condition, you can then actually do something about it. So these things about the ability to do that is a really very simple idea, and that to me is what I'm most proud of is having these ideas that can make a difference to people's lives.
No, I agree. No, it's been very insightful just to have this conversation with you and just to hear more about what you're working on and all the information here. So I just want to thank you. I want to take the time to say thank you for joining me today and just being on and just coming on with enthusiasm and just ready to get to it. So we have the LinkedIn.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute
Yeah.
pleasure. So
Oh,
thank you for the opportunity, Idris. And I just want to say I really enjoyed the series so far, and I'm looking forward to even more of these because they are very thought-provoking and they're very enjoyable to not only to listen to, but also to be involved with as well. So thank you.
Yeah. So to the watchers, to the audience, connect with Mr. Sweeney, Mark Sweeney, QB, get in there. We'll get the LinkedIn and ready to go. And thanks again, Mark. It's been a real pleasure.
Indeed. Thank you, Idris, and have a great day.